There are a lot of characters in Arcane, and a lot of them are scientists, inventors, engineers, people who make things, and I wanted to explore what those creations reveal about them as people, because I think the show is great at this. There's so much you can tease out. It's the sort of thing I enjoy anyway, because I am a therapist. Part of the job is exploring who people are via their habits, behaviours, interests, what it all says about them. But also from a writing point of view, it just tightens the story so much more. You know, in like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang fights in a very open, evasive style that doesn't just suit his airbender training, but also his mediator approach to conflict. Toph is staunch and stubborn as she fights. Zuko is at first very aggressive, then as he changes as a person, so does his style. And you know, you could just write it that Jayce invented the Hex Gate because that's what's needed in the plot, that's what the writers wanted to happen. But when you can make that invention also carry personal meaning for Jayce, that's when your story is golden. So what can we learn from all of them? Let's just begin. Let's start with Ekko, because I think he's the most obvious one. The show pretty much tells us this outright in one of his lines of dialogue, but Ekko invents the hoverboard. I get the impression he's invented other things too. I get the impression he's going to invent more in season 2, but for now it's mainly the hoverboard. And we can make two separate points here. The first, this is a vehicle designed for transport, but one with total freedom of movement. It's not like the Hex Gate that takes you from clear points A to B, nor is it big and lumbering that has to like stick to roads or can't turn certain corners, can't fit certain gaps. No, you can pretty much fly anywhere with this very small agile thing. So in a very literal sense, this is a vehicle that gives freedom to the ordinary people that use it, especially when they exist in an environment where their rights and their freedom and power is often suppressed. In a lot of ways, I think that kind of encapsulates what Ekko fights for. Though I think the agility of this invention also means more, because it's the Firelights that use it. They are essentially a guerrilla resistance against Silco, so something very quick and agile that can have them like speed out of the dark, quickly steal something or smash something and then zip away again. That's perfect for them. It's very much their fighting style. You know, Vi fights like a boxer, or rather an infighter or a slugger style of boxer. She wants to just go in and fight Silco head on, but Ekko wouldn't have the resources to do that. And with a bit of speculation on my part, I think the warm sense of community we get from their hideout, based on that, I think Ekko would be reluctant to sacrifice his people in any kind of war of attrition anyway. Quick raids and sabotage to shimmer production or Silco's profits is the best way the Firelights could fight back, and the hoverboard does play neatly into that.
You'd be surprised what you can pull off when your life depends on it.
That's point one, but point two, we should note the hoverboard isn't as sneaky as all of that makes it sound. You've got these very bright green firelights coming out of the back of it, nor is it an exactly quiet contraption. You know, and maybe that's just like faults with the products that Ekko wants to tweak and perfect upon, but also I think it could say a lot about Ekko and everyone else riding these, that they appear as bright lights in the darkness, which, well, that's the whole idea behind calling themselves firelights, right? A symbol of hope in an otherwise very dark and polluted air, which is where this scene becomes so relevant. Heimerdinger looks at the design and is confused by it. There's so many safer alternatives you could have gone with, some kind of vehicle where you're seated or you can be strapped into place or something. As someone who grew up skating, it's very easy to fall off a board, so why go with a hoverboard?
Because it's so much fun, Chad!
Because it's damn cool. You know, hover cars would be cool, so would hover bikes, and both would probably be more practical, but if I was able to try one of them in real life, if they were things, I think I'd definitely pick a hoverboard. No question. Look at them just zipping around the tree. It's not enough to just efficiently and practically fight against Silco, put up some form of resistance. You also have to give hope, to offer a sense of community. It all has to mean something. You have to feel something. You need people to buy into your resistance.
It's not enough to give people what they need to survive. You have to give them what they need to live.
So, yeah, that quote tells us kind of all of it. That's Ekko. Of course, we all need different things to live, that can vary, but there are some constants like food, shelter, belonging, world anvil.
Stanwyck set his personal ambitions aside and focused on something far more important.
World Anvil!
I had no idea.
Oh, you better believe it's World Anvil! They are sponsoring this video, they are offering you 51% off, and they are an online tool for building worlds, you may have guessed. But also creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for all sorts of different games. My best friend uses it for D&D, but there's lots of other games. You can use it for planning your stories, writing your stories, working on all sorts of creative projects. For me, it is my novel. I need a tool like this, otherwise I am far too chaotic. We're moving flat soon and I literally have 6 cardboard boxes full of random sheets of A4 paper I've written old ideas on. Pre-World Anviled me was a nightmare. So with something like this, not only can I keep everything organised, keep it all in one place, be able to easily edit things, but I can create timelines, I can create hyperlinks branching off specific characters or articles or a billion other things that just make it so much easier to find stuff. Planning things can be hard, especially when there's so much to do, but having all of these tools to help visualize it, to help split everything down into specific points, articles one at a time, it helps immensely. I'm not going to show you because it's a secret, but I've created different bio pages for all of the characters in my world, even the minor ones, which house they live in, what their job is, who they're friends with, who they hate, what different beliefs they have or opinions about events that go on in a book or whatever. So, World Anvil is great. I hope you can hear my passion, and if you desire, if you crave. If you call to the heavens for a 51% discount, then use the code TREE, or click the link in the description, or the pinned comment, or if you just want to try out the free version, then go for that. You know, there's no time limit on it. Test it out for as long as you want. World Anvil. Jayce is a bit more complicated to explain. His story of course starts with magic saving his life and also saving his mum's life at a time when he wasn't able to save her himself, and at his core Jayce is looking for a way to harness that kind of magic for himself. It's a solid motivation. So many characters in this show are driven by a desire to prevent death. The mage saved us then, however next time he won't be there. And I think also you might just be driven as a means to try and process what the hell actually happened there. 1 minute you thought you were dying, you felt utterly helpless, your mum was collapsing. That's likely a traumatic experience, and then suddenly a stranger appears and it's all gone, but nothing is explained, you don't really know what happened, and you never see that person again? That's a lot for a child to wrap their head around. I think Jayce's absolute fashion with the Arcane makes perfect sense. And admittedly, I don't know how magic works in this world. I know nothing about League of Legends. I only saw Arcane for the first time last week, but I wonder why Jayce never tried learning to become a mage himself. This is a question I'm asking you as well as the audience. Is it because it's not physically possible for all people to become a mage? Can only certain people have magic? Is it because it's outlawed? Is it impossible to find a teacher as a result? Or is it also something else? There is something else I could mention. I think it's going to become clearer when we look at what he actually invents with his hex tech, which is firstly the hex gates, kind of like hyperspace jump points or portals that vastly increase trade and boost economy because travel becomes so much quicker. I find this one really interesting because there's so much talk between Jayce and Viktor about improving ordinary people's lives, and the economy is of course important to that. I'm not dismissing it, but by and large it is mostly a benefit to the already wealthy. From what we see in the show, the hex gates make little or zero difference to those in the Undercity, and yet this is the key invention. Why? For me, I think it highlights Jayce's class situation. Jayce is a good person. I think he does genuinely want to help those in the Undercity. He does care. However, he also doesn't understand and has no perspective in what it's like down there. What he does understand is the upper classes. He isn't from a major family himself, but he does study with those who are, or is their student, or their patron, or he is courting one of their daughters to begin with. That's a society he does understand, and yet is also never quite allowed to belong to. We see him almost exiled exiled at the beginning of the show. He feels he belongs to their world, and yet somehow there's this distance, so what can he do to change that? Invent something they love, that they would crave, want him for. Then they'll have to accept him. You know, the hex gates are far too profitable to turn your nose up. Do you not find it interesting that Heimerdinger was happy to approve the hex gates without much delay? However, when it comes to these other inventions, ones specifically designed to support the lives of people in the Undercity, suddenly safety takes precedence and it needs an entire decade of extra testing. Not that that is the whole picture, and I'm going to pick holes in this idea a little later on, but is that still not interesting? Does that maybe say something about Heimerdinger? The hex gates are in many ways necessary for Jayce to be allowed to continue his work, but they are also a means for him to be socially accepted, to go from someone facing exile to someone with his face on mugs and blimps and giving speeches, and then later accepted onto the council. I think this drives Jayce too. He wants to reach the class level of all these people he's grown up around but never quite belonged to, been a lackey to, even when his parents helped build so much. Jayce wants fame and he wants social standing. And then these Atlas gauntlets to help people in the mining colonies work without fatigue, and the hex claw that they're pretty vague about.
Imagine what our artificers could do with such a device.
Look, I'm torn on this one now, because on one level I feel like these are inventions made because they, I assume, are cool weapons in the actual game, and therefore the show needs some kind of reasoning to write them into the world. So I don't know if we're supposed to analyse too hard here, but either way, they are very odd devices for people hoping to bring hex tech into the lives of the ordinary man. You know, if you wanted to benefit ordinary people's lives, I think this is an odd first instinct. They would probably help, you know, there is big concerns about how these might lead to a loss of job cuts in the mining colonies, plus Heimerdinger isn't entirely wrong. These function incredibly well as weapons. Giving them to ordinary people could be dangerous, especially when you have to consider, is it the ordinary people who would actually receive them? How would you regulate who uses them and when? What if it all ends up in the hands of someone like Silco? Most of all, I think these weapons surely would function best within the military, as Mel's mum sort of argues. If you wanted to improve the lives of ordinary people, shouldn't you be working on products to clean polluted air or something like that? So, what's going on? And I should of course also point out that Viktor plays a hand in these inventions, but I think these ones seem to mainly be Jayce's. And what I'm seeing is someone fascinated with the idea of beefing himself up, let's say. Big gloves, a giant hammer, lasers. Could this be about a boy who grew up feeling like the small fish in a giant pond, wanting to now appear as the bigger fish? These are inventions that enhance a person, help them punch harder than they ordinarily do, swing a hammer with more force. I don't know, I just see Jayce in this suit, trying to appear tough before and better, and I can't help but feel like Jayce's inventions function in a similar way, to symbolically puff up a man who feels insecure about his social standing and social value. Does that one make sense? I'm intrigued for what you all will say. I think that one's the most difficult to pick apart, so I'll leave that with you now while we move on to Viktor. It is difficult with both Jayce and Viktor because, yeah, as much as I can speculate, we don't know how much influence each had with which inventions, but we do know the hex core was Viktor's epiphany. And even whilst Jayce does talk of helping with it and finding a means to heal Viktor, we don't actually see Jayce contributing to this one. Not to say he doesn't at all, but that does highlight Jayce's focus is absorbed with politics much more. So what does the hex core tell us about Viktor? Well, let's start with how Viktor came to the idea. Where Jayce has always seen hextech as a tool, as a means for creating tools that benefit and enhance a person, Viktor's wondering about the reverse.
Molding them to a useful function. Tools, as you like to put it. But it's said the Arcane speaks through them. They think.
What if the hex core can be something alive and independent, something greater or purer that Viktor, or whoever, can tap into like a muse? Draw upon it like a blessing from a god. In that regard, this is the total opposite to Jayce's viewpoint. To Jayce, technology is a simple, lesser thing that exists for me to make use of. For Viktor, it's something greater that might permit me some benefits. Two men driven by kind of similar insecurities, but in different ways. I talked about this more in my recent Arcane video that I think is worth watching. The algorithm very much disagreed on that video, but I talked about Viktor there. I also mentioned about Viktor's experience with Rio and how that might be a formative one in his life, where science enabled Singed to cultivate this rare mutation, to again create something alive and independent and beautiful. I think the scene where Viktor's blood merges with the hex core is very deliberately spliced between scenes of Jayce and Mel having sex. Technology enabled Jayce to appear like something more, but for Viktor, as I think we often see in his character, I don't think he entirely believes he can be something more. Therefore he has to create something else instead, something entirely separate to fill that gap. And it is kind of like a god's. It blesses Viktor with a gift, replaces his leg with a different one, and I think replaces is the right word there. I think cure or heal would have different implications, but this is a new leg replacing a part of Viktor. This hex core can give, but it can also take away. Viktor tries to smash it, and it reacts to that. It damages his leg again, punishes him, let's say, leaves him kind of back to square one. So I think that's kind of the essence here, chasing something more pure and wonderful than Viktor believes he can ever be himself. And I can't help wonder with the further blessings that Viktor might need from this to prevent his illness, at what point does Hexcore literally replace Viktor? Maybe that's a dumb question, I don't know. What about Singed? I had to think about this one, watch back a few scenes again, because I was stuck on the question of why the hell did Singed invent Shimmer, not Simmer, this horrible drug that Silco uses to gain power over the Undercity and damage the lives of a lot of vulnerable people. Why do that? He doesn't appear to be gaining anything important in exchange in terms of what we're shown about him, you know. Singed doesn't appear to want money, doesn't appear to have people he wants to protect. Maybe Silco facilitates and pays for all of Singed's research in exchange, but then why is that so important? Why does Singed need to do so much research? But then you look at Rio, this innocent creature that Singed was trying to prevent the death of. I would say save her life, but Rio doesn't appear to have much life by the end. You see she has tubes strapped up to her, pumping something purple into her body, and I think we're meant to assume this is an early version of Shimmer, or one variant of it. Very different from the strength-altering version that Silco then later wants, but before that, at its core, what does Shimmer basically do?
Nature has made us intolerant to change, but fortunately, we have the capacity to change our nature.
This is the one very loose but still undeniable thing we know about Shimmer. It helps free up a body to allow its nature to be altered. I think that's what Singed was always doing, fighting against the natural inevitability of death. We see Singed later has improved upon this to effectively save Jinx's life. The fact Shimmer could also be used to turn people into frenzied brutes. Sure, he adapted a version of that for Silco, but I think this was the purpose, fighting mortality. And I think Singed is happy to cross any lines necessary for the sake of that. But again, why? I am hoping to learn more about Singed next season. At the moment it is quite vague, and there are just small hints to piece together his character, but the one hint we do have I think paints a pretty consistent picture.
I too once had a daughter.
Which clearly means she died, and that was an incredibly painful experience for Singed. He mentions this in relation to the idea of Silco's sanity being tested. This is how much it affected Singed. He couldn't save her, but what if he could? What if it had been possible to save his daughter? He can't literally go back now and save her, no, but trauma is rarely literal in that sense, or our response to it isn't. You still have the past events stuck in your mind as though they are present, and therefore he could still save people like his daughter, or know that he's created something so that other people who were like him don't have to suffer the same pain, or it is just much more simply symbolic of saving his daughter. I think Singed is obsessed with this research because of that experience. I think that's what he's trying to process. And in that sense, I also can't help wonder if his daughter was named Rio as well, or had a similar name or something like that. I think that would be interesting, but that's quite the stretch from me. Either way, this is a pretty clear picture we have of Singed, so what about Jinx? Jinx, or Powder, creates a lot of bombs. And to begin with, I think the motivation behind that is quite obvious. She can't fight like the others, but she wants to contribute to the team. If she could create bombs, that could help in a fight, and therefore she can contribute. She can then feel she belongs on a practical level, she becomes a valued member of the group. Why she gives her bombs names and draws faces on them? Well, she's a child at the time. But also these are her creations, they are things she's poured a lot of personal time into. And thirdly, we know she's also struggling with the trauma of losing her parents. We know that affects Powder deeply. We see how much she cries when Vi leaves her back at home for the mission. Powder struggles with experiences of being left or lost or feeling abandoned. I made a video recently about attachment theory in Coraline, and I think Powder here is a very good example of anxious attachment. Anxiously attached to Vi. I think the idea of Powder responding to the loss of her parents and this struggle with attachment by giving personality to her creations, like they are toys or like they are transitional objects, I think that makes sense. But then something happens. Her bomb works too well. Milo and Clagger die as a direct result of the blast, and then Vi, pained and angry at their loss, calls Powder a Jinx. Before, I think them giving herself a timeout, I don't think she completely abandons Powder here. I think she just walks away to recover, but Powder is still within earshot. It is a tragedy that Vi never gets the chance to go back to her. And from Powder's perspective, all of this is traumatic again. I think the fact we continue to see some childlike qualities to her adult behaviour makes sense in that light, including her continuing kind of toy-like approach she has towards her bombs. It strikes me as a depiction of childhood trauma. Powder has done something that sticks her with so much horrible guilt and shame, resulting in what she feels like total abandonment from her sister, the one person she has a strong attachment to still. I don't think it's her fault exactly. I don't think she needs to feel that level of guilt, but she does, to an extent where she feels like she can't possibly forgive or redeem herself. She has been cursed as a Jinx, and she cannot change that. She loses everything she's ever loved, despite how desperately she needs Vi. How do you respond to that? In Powder's case, she leans into it. She makes it her defense. Yes, I am a Jinx. Yes, I do jinx and ruin everything, and that is who I am. I think in allowing that to become the foundation of her identity, it's partly shielding her from some of that guilt and shame beneath. Destruction becomes one of her primary motivations in that lens, to erase. If I can't ever possibly prepare things, then I might as well just erase all of it so things can start over again. There is just something incredibly tragic, I think, in the idea of running from feelings of shame like that, trying to wipe them clean, but at the same time, she is so entirely caught up in the past. She cannot move on like that. Her ultimate invention and ultimate action in this story is the giant fish bomb thing, because everything else has gone wrong, so screw it. Blow it all up. Take the Jinx identity to the absolute extreme. It's one of the most fantastic endings to a season 1 show I can think of. It makes me so excited and terrified to see the impact of this in season 2. In Jinx's creations, I think we see both someone leaning into the idea of destruction and jinxing and ruining, and moulding it into a kind of triumph, as well as someone caught up trying to erase and destroy everything she is haunted by. It's great, and after her, that leaves Heimerdinger. But I don't know what to say about him, honestly. I don't know what he invented. There's a lot of talk about how much Heimerdinger accomplished, and I know he is one of the founders of Piltover, but beyond that, I don't know. Not to say there aren't things I could say about his character. I think I could make an interesting character analysis about the man.
Yordle.
But I couldn't talk about what his inventions tell us about him, so I think I'm just going to leave this one open to everyone else. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment your thoughts, good or bad. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. If you fancy, then support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, or check out my other Arcane video, or our other channel. You know, just do whatever you fancy, and hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.